Good afternoon. The next item of business is portfolio questions. Unusual to as many people in as possible. Short, snappy questions. Nice little curt answers. Can I say that to members that questions 3 and 6 are grouped together? To remind you, I'll take question 3 that it's supplementary, question 6 if it's supplementary. Then anyone who has supplementaries to the 2 questions should seek to get in then. Question 1, Joan McAlpine.
Scottish Government how many gender recognition certificates it expects to be issued under its proposed system of self-declaration and how this compares with the current system.
Cabinet Secretary Shirley-Anne Somerville.
Based on international evidence, we expect around 250 applications per year under the proposed new system in Scotland for obtaining legal gender recognition. The current UK Gender Recognition Panel does not produce statistics on applicants from Scotland, but we estimate that around 30 people per year who were born or adopted in Scotland obtained legal gender recognition at the moment.
Joan McAlpine.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The Government says its proposals will not diminish the rights of women. However, its own draft equality impact assessment evidences this by citing Bristol University research, which criticises single-sex spaces and the Equality Act's exemptions and suggests that a woman catching sight of a male body in a changing room should be no more distressing than seeing another woman with a mastectomy. Does the Government regret citing this research, and do they agree that the comparison is insulting to breast cancer survivors?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the impact assessment, obviously, that the member refers to is a draft impact assessment, and I would encourage members, and indeed members of the public, to feed in their responses to the consultation, both on what is in the draft bill, but also on the impact assessments. The research that is referenced to was there because of a reference within that work to show that there is no increased risk of women being attacked within single-sex spaces by trans women. And that's why that report was in there. Obviously, the other parts of the research, specifically the one section that the member refers to, is not something that the government would support, and nor do we support any changes to the exemptions within the Equality Act.
Alec Cole-Hamilton, briefly.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that international evidence suggests that where a strict custodial sentence is applied for false declaration on a gender recognition certificate has reduced or eradicated any risk that this system will be misused? Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I would agree with Mr Cole-Hamilton's assertion. There is a great understandable concern within members of the public, particularly from women, that there would be an increased risk to women because of the changes to gender recognition that the government is proposing. That's why I've outlined very specifically within the consultation in the draft bill that there are no diminution of women's rights within our proposals, that the exemptions within the Equality Act still stand, and of course there are strict penalties for anyone who abuses the current system, and those would indeed be strengthened under our proposed system.
Question 2, Jenny Gilruth.
Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with the UK Government regarding the WASPI campaign.
Cabinet Secretary.
Since 2017, the Scottish Government has written to the UK Government on this issue on 6 separate occasions. We do not agree with the unfair manner in which the UK Government has imposed a change of state pension age on women born in the 1950s. The UK Government should take responsibility for its actions and compensate those women who have had their retirement plans shattered and are now forced back into employment to make ends meet, all because their pension age was changed without fair notification from the UK Government.
Jenny Gilruth.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. My constituent is 62. In 2016, she was forced to take early retirement at 58 following serious ongoing health conditions. She is not eligible for universal credit, and she's been forced to repeatedly use Glenrothes Food Bank just to survive. This year, it was only because of a welfare crisis fund that she could afford Christmas at all. Does the Cabinet Secretary think this is acceptable, and can she confirm what support the Scottish Government can provide for people like my constituent, who through no fault of their own have fallen victim to Westminster's callous pension reform?
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I recognise that Jenny Goldruth has raised this constituent's case with me before and commend her for continuing to do so. It is not acceptable, and I would once again call on the UK Government to do the right thing and could compensate women who have had their pension rights taken away. The Scottish Government's Money Talk Team Income Maximisation Service is there to help older people. However, the real solution to this pension crisis is for the UK Government to take responsibility and act to end the misery faced by Jenny Goldruth's constituent and thousands of others like her.
Question 3, Willie Rennie.
To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has to change the qualifying criteria for carers' allowance.
Cabinet Secretary.
We will consult on changes to carers' allowance in early 2021 and we intend to introduce Scottish carers' assistance the following year.
Willie Rennie.
Marie Curie have called for an extension of the payment threshold after the person who's been cared for has died. When you lose a person you are caring for, it is truly devastating. Does the Minister agree that we can't expect them all to be back on their feet and re-establish their working lives within weeks? And how will the carers' allowance in Scotland reflect that?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I do recognise the issue that Willie Rennie has raised. It is one which stakeholders have raised with me directly. I have already asked the Disability and Carers Benefits Expert Advisory Group for recommendations by May 2020 on carers' assistance that we will consult, as I mentioned in my original answer, in 2021. And I'm sure this will be one of the areas which will be brought up both within the DAC-PIAG recommendations and the consultation when it goes out to the wider members of the public.
Question 6, Monica Lennon.
To ask the Scottish Government how much the carers' allowance earnings threshold will be in 2020-2021 and how many claimants reported earnings in 2019-20.
Cabinet Secretary.
Carers' allowance is currently being delivered in Scotland by the Department of Work and Pensions on a temporary basis through an agency agreement. This allowed us to introduce our carers' allowance supplement in 2018 and get extra money to the carers in Scotland sooner than would otherwise have been possible. Under the terms of the agency agreement, the earnings threshold for carers' allowance in Scotland for 2020-2021 will be the same as applied by the DWP in England and Wales. For 2020-2021, DWP have set the threshold at £108 per week, an increase from the 2019-20 threshold of £123 per week. DWP do not produce management information on carers' allowance claimants' reported earnings in Scotland.
Monica Lennon.
The minimum wage is set to rise at 4 times the rate of inflation, meaning that the earnings threshold is once again falling way behind increases in pay. At the Maximise project in Wester Hales, I know the Social Security Committee heard from a mother who lost her carers' allowance because of the minimum wage increase last year. The Cabinet Secretary has said that change could come from 2025, but will she commit to ending the agency arrangements and increase the earning threshold as a matter of urgency so that carers do not have to suffer a further 5 years of work failing to pay?
Cabinet Secretary.
As I said in my answer to Willie Rennie, we will introduce the Scottish Carers Assistance in 2022. I would say to Monica Lennon again to look at the reality of the situation, again which I explained to Willie Rennie and to herself. We introduced the Carers Allowance Supplement in the way that we did to ensure that money was done as quickly as possible. If Monica Lennon would like the Carers Assistance to be introduced earlier, she can perhaps tell me in writing or just now what she would like to change. Would she like to not do the Scottish Child Payment? Would she like not to do the Scottish Child's replacement for DLA or the replacement to PIP? We have a timetable for social security. It is full and it is something which we work very, very carefully to deliver as fast as possible. So Monica Lennon needs to deal in the reality of what we are doing and recognise the fact that the first act that we did within devolved social security was actually increase the amount paid to carers.
And Ms Lennon is not getting another supplementary, so you'll have to deal with that out of here. I take Michelle Ballantyne, followed by Alistair Allen. Brief supplementaries, please.
Thank you. The SNP made a manifesto pledge in 2016 to introduce a new national minimum fostering allowance for kinship and foster care. To date, we have seen no progress. The Fostering Network's report in 2019 on the state of foster care shows that 60% of foster carers feel the allowance doesn't meet the costs of raising a child. Does the Scottish Government still plan to introduce a national minimum fostering allowance, and by when will it be implemented?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as the Social Security representative for the Scottish Conservatives, Ms Ballantyne will recognise that that's not a matter that sits within my portfolio, but I certainly will get the relevant minister to reply to her in writing.
Alistair Allen.
Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that carers' allowance was the lowest paid benefit by the UK Government, and can she confirm that the introduction of an additional payment by the Scottish Government means it is now above the level of job seekers' allowance?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, it certainly is indeed the case that the carers allowance supplement that we introduced, as I said to Mona Clennon, as our first work within the agency has ensured that the carers allowance supplement plus the carers allowance takes the money paid to carers to recognise their contribution to society to larger than that of job seekers allowance.
Question 4, Ruth Maguire.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it's taking to address child poverty in North Ayrshire.
Cabinet Secretary.
Last year, we invested £1.4 billion in support to low-income households across Scotland, including those in North Ayrshire, which includes £100 million to mitigate UK Government welfare cuts. Our Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan outlines how we will tackle child poverty, including plans to introduce the new Scottish Child Payment worth £10 per week for eligible households. We have also committed £22 million to parental employment support and are almost doubling funded early learning and childcare for all 3- and 4-year-olds and eligible 2-year-olds.
Ruth Maguire.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Free school meal entitlement is really helpful for parents, and in particular meals during school holidays provide valuable assistance. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what research the Scottish Government has undertaken into local initiatives that provide holiday meals, and how going forward the Scottish Government will support the dignified provision of food for families struggling?
Cabinet Secretary.
We have focused £2 million of our £3.5 million Fair Food Fund in 2019-20 on the school holidays. That funding provided to third sector organisations and local authorities is there to deliver nutritious meals and activity programmes, includes evaluation to understand the impact and to identify best practice. The Scottish Government is supporting communities to respond to food insecurity in a way that promotes dignity by taking a human rights approach to tackling food insecurity. And we will continue to focus on tackling the causes of food insecurity and are working with local authorities through the Scottish Welfare Fund to provide a safety net for vulnerable people on low incomes.
Kenneth Gibson, briefly.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that in its valiant attempts to reduce child poverty in North Ayrshire and across Scotland, the Scottish Government is hampered by the impact of UK Government policies such as welfare reform, which has actually increased child poverty?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, it is a sad fact that the UK Government is still pursuing policies which do increase child poverty. As you know, Presiding Officer, Scotland is the only UK country to have set statutory targets for reducing child poverty, and the UK Government's assault on welfare and continued benefit cuts does make it feel like we are fighting poverty with one hand tied behind our back.
Question 5, Alison Harris.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the action that it is taking to reduce loneliness amongst older people.
Minister Christina McKelvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government recognises that social isolation and loneliness can affect anyone at any age or any stage in their life, and I'm delighted today to update both Alison Harris and colleagues in the Chamber to tell them that I will be co-chairing the third meeting of the National Implementation Group for our social isolation and loneliness strategy on the 6th of February 2020, along with Councillor Parry of Cosla, one of our key partners in this work. We will be discussing how we can use the up to £1 million allocated funding to develop solutions that are right for communities throughout Scotland. Organisations that work in communities are, of course, key to tackling social isolation and loneliness, and we will continue to be, will continue to be at the heart of that work.
Alison Harris.
I thank the Minister for her answer. In December last year, Age Scotland predicted that 111,000 older people in Scotland would sit down to dinner alone on Christmas Day. And I know that the First Minister commented on loneliness before Christmas. Indeed, at FMQs, the First Minister said, and I quote, "I very much agree that we should see this as a public health issue." So may I ask the Minister whether this is perhaps an indication of a potential government portfolio change in the near future?
Minister, to below the belt.
I would hope that Alison Harris and other colleagues did see the message that I put out at Christmas on social isolation and loneliness, and that's working alongside all of these organisations. Age Scotland is another key partner in an implementation group as well, and we do absolutely treat social isolation and loneliness as a public health issue. That's why we do have joint ministerial meetings in order to deal with it. So I can absolutely reassure Alison Harris that this work is important. We are doing it. Whether it's a portfolio change is not within my gift.
Keith Brown, briefly.
Television access is one way that older people can maintain a connection to the outside world. Does the Minister therefore agree that the removal of free TV licences for over 75s is a misguided decision and will do nothing to reduce the risk of social isolation and loneliness amongst vulnerable older people? And in addition, will the Minister urge the UK Government to fully fund free licences?
Minister.
Yes. Presiding officer, this, in my opinion, will be very detrimental to many older people across the UK. It's a clear abdication of responsibility from, I have to say, a heartless Tory government who are trying to shift what is a welfare policy onto a public broadcaster. This was a Tory government decision showing they are clearly shirking in their responsibility to support older people. The BBC's plan to introduce a means-tested waived system on pension credit has at least shone a bit of a light on this benefit and resulted in an increase in uptake. The UK government should recognise they are a new government, they are saying they're going to do things differently, but they should absolutely recognise the responsibility to fund free TV licences for our over 75s. And I would hope our colleagues and the Conservatives across the chamber themselves would, they voted in the debate before Christmas, would take that up with some of their new colleagues and their new portfolios as they move forward.
Question 7, Gordon Linhart.
To ask the Scottish Government what steps it is taking to ensure that there will be a functioning equivalent to the Motability Scheme in Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government published details of the Accessible Vehicles and Equipment Scheme on the 4th of September 2019 and will ensure that disabled people receive the same service that they currently receive under the existing Motability Scheme. The scheme will ensure that disabled people in Scotland can lease a car, electric scooter or powered wheelchair at a heavily discounted rate without having to undergo credit checks from an accredited provider. The application process for the accreditation scheme opened on the 4th of October and closed on the 4th of November, and the Scottish Government will announce the outcome of the accreditation process in due course.
Gordon Linhart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Can she also give assurances that those currently on the Motability Scheme will have full access to equipment and services that they currently do, and also advise Parliament the number of providers who are already accredited under the new scheme?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as I said in my original answer to Mr Lyndhurst, I will make an announcement on the outcome of the accreditation process in due course. I'm unable to give the number of organisations that would be part of that, but I am happy to absolutely give a reassurance that no one who presently has a Motability vehicle will lose out once the new scheme opens, and the Scottish Government is working with Motability to ensure that disabled people with a Motability vehicle will keep it until the end of their lease, subject to continuing, of course, to meeting the eligibility criteria of the relevant mobility component.
Sandra White, very briefly, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, Disability News Service revealed in November that more than 100,000 disabled people have lost their mobility vehicles after being reassessed by this Conservative's disability benefit reforms. Does the Minister not agree with me that he thinks it's a bit rich that the Tories bring this to the Chamber today?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Sandra White is quite right to point out that disabled people have been badly let down by the UK Government as a result of the introduction of PIP, and it is disappointing that so many disabled people have lost access to a vital scheme like Motability. We are clear that we won't be taking an austerity-led, target-driven approach, and we will deal with what matters, which is providing a good service to clients.
Question 8, Daniel Johnson.
To ask the Scottish Government what the maximum backdating period is for the Scottish Child Payment.
Cabinet Secretary.
As stated in my written answer to Mark Griffin on the 19th of December, the Scottish Child Payment Regulations will include provisions to allow Scottish ministers to make a determination without application wherein an individual has been unsuccessful in their original application as a result of a qualifying benefit or child responsibility benefit decision. In these instances where this was as a result of an incorrect decision being made on a reserve benefit and the person has since received a backdated award, the Scottish Child Payment will also be backdated to the point a person first applied for the payment. This is set out in the revised draft regulations published on the 20th of December.
Daniel Johnson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. As the Cabinet Secretary will know, under Scotland's choices, over 60,000 people have opted for fortnightly payments of universal credit, which provides greater financial security for those budgeting on low incomes. But as it stands, child payment will not be paid fortnightly. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that it would be consistent with Scotland's choices and better meet the needs of people's lives if it was paid fortnightly?
Cabinet Secretary, and briefly, please.
This is certainly something which we would be happy to look at when we'll be reviewing the Scottish Child Payment. I would simply say to Mr Johnson that the speed of the introduction of the Scottish Child Payment is unprecedented. That is requiring us to look at both the legislative route and the existing functionality within Social Security Scotland, but it is something which I'm happy to come back to. But I'm sure he would also want to ensure that the first payments can indeed be made by Christmas this year, and for that to happen, we have to make decisions around how we can introduce this benefit as simply as possible.
Thank you. That concludes questions on social security and older people. I'm moving straight on to questions on finance, economy and fair work. I remind members that questions 1 and 5 and questions 3 and 8 are grouped together with the usual consequences if you want a supplementary. Question 1, Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how much it has provided in loans through the Digital Growth Fund.
Minister Ivan McKee.
The Digital Development Loan is the first pilot programme delivered from the Digital Growth Fund. Its purpose is to provide low-cost finance to support Scotland's small and medium-sized businesses to invest in the digital technologies and skills necessary to boost growth and productivity. As of December 2019, the total amount disbursed through the Digital Development Loan is £2,142,000. Phase 2 of the programme began in September 2019, and early figures from the first quarter of this second phase indicate an encouraging spike in demand. There are approximately 44 loans in the pipeline worth around £1.9 million.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Minister for that response. The Digital Growth Fund of £36 million was announced in 2017, and yet in June 2018 to August 2019 through phase 1, there was only £1.7 million spent. So can I ask the Minister to confirm, he's already indicated there's going to be a second phase, will there be 21 other phases to ensure that the £36 million figure is spent, or is that completely unrealistic?
Minister.
Thank you. The £36 million was across a whole range of programmes, and this is one part of that whole suite of programmes. The programme is demand-led, and any eligible businesses who want a loan can apply to receive one. We've established a baseline market in which we intend to build with business organisations and the loan providers. We recognise the huge value of this to the economy, and we're working with businesses to come forward and take advantage of these loans. I would encourage any businesses that are listening to do so, and if the member knows of any businesses, to please encourage them to do so. As I said, the programme is demand-led, the availability is there, and it's for businesses to come forward and take advantage of that provision.
Question 5, Finlay Carson.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it plans to increase its digital economy budget.
Minister.
As the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Economy and Fair Work has made clear, it's extremely difficult for the Scottish Government to confirm its spending plans in the absence of a UK budget. We continue to press the UK budget for urgent clarification. That said, we are acutely aware of the economic potential of Scotland's digital economy, and that is why we will continue to invest heavily in digital infrastructure skills and encouraging investment in digital and data-driven innovation to improve outcomes in policy areas as diverse as health, education, climate change and economic development.
Finlay Carson.
I thank the Minister for his response. The SNP Government's £600 million flagship R100 broadband scheme has been beset by delays, and the North of Scotland now faces legal challenge. Since the R100 policy was announced in 2017, the budget for the digital economy has fallen dramatically from £114 million to £32 million in the last year's budget. Will the Minister commit to an increase in the digital economy budget to ensure that rural communities like mine do not fall further behind while his government sorts out the issues, the contracts are signed and we see R100 starting to be delivered on the ground?
I don't know if it's this Minister's portfolio, but Mr McKee.
Yeah, correct. It's not my portfolio, but happy to comment on that. As the member is well aware, or should be, this area is a reserved matter. However, having said that, the Scottish Government has stepped in to roll out the R100 programme at our own expense to fill the gaps left by the UK Government. We're proceeding faster with the rollout of superfast broadband across Scotland than the UK Government is across the rest of the UK. And my colleague Mr Wheelhouse, I understand, will be making a statement on this very matter tomorrow in the Chamber.
Richard Lyle, briefly, please.
Supplementary to question 1, can the Minister outline what additional support is available to business and individuals to build their digital capabilities?
Minister.
For businesses, our £1.6 million Digital Boost programme provides SMEs with advice and support in implementing new technologies, reskilling and trading online. The Digital Development Loan makes £12 million worth of interest-free loans available to SMEs to invest in implementing that advice. And digitisation of SMEs is also an economic priority of the incoming EU Commission, and we will work closely with EU partners to understand the most effective interventions for individuals. In addition to the substantial digital provision available through our colleges, universities and apprenticeship programme, we have recently established the £1 million Digital Start Fund, which supports people on low incomes with the right aptitude to reskill into well-paid digital careers. And we've also invested £800,000 through SDS in the Digital Skills Investment Plan and around £3 million in Code Clan, which has delivered 800 highly skilled professionals to the Scottish economy.
Question 2, John Mason.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with the UK Government regarding the timing of the UK and Scottish budgets.
Cabinet Secretary Derek
As
McCann.
I've said clearly, the delay in the UK Government's budget is highly unsatisfactory, as it's needed to provide absolute clarity on future funding for public services in Scotland. The Chancellor's announcement yesterday, without any consultation or prior notice, that the UK budget would take place on the 11th of March is astonishing, particularly when I wrote to the Chancellor on the 22nd of December, offering to discuss budget timing. I remain focused on introducing a Scottish budget for 2020-21 at the earliest practical opportunity, and will continue to work closely with the Finance and Constitution Committee, the Scottish Fiscal Commission, and, as I said yesterday, other opposition parties.
John Mason.
Thank you, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response. I think the Accounts Commission has been expressing its concerns for local government, and I would also be concerned that further down the line, the third sector often gets money from the local government and will have to wait even longer. Can you give any reassurance to both local government and the third sector?
John Mason. Oh, sorry, Cabinet Secretary.
Well, first of all, the reassurance I'd want to give, as I said yesterday, I want to ensure that there's an orderly process that builds consensus and confidence in the Scottish budget, not just the process, the timing, scrutiny, the contents as well. I'll be meeting with COSLA urgently to discuss massive interest to local government and others to take forward these issues. Now, I have received a letter from the Chief Secretary to the Treasury just today. He's written to me to say, I've put detail in my letter, that is, as he notes in my letter, there are issues that I would wish to discuss in detail, and he'll welcome the chance to do so. His office will be in touch to discuss timing. I hope that's a wee bit more constructive than the appalling treatment that the Scottish Government and the people of Scotland have had from the UK Government thus far.
Now, as there was a statement in this yesterday, I want short supplementaries. Dean Lockhart, followed by Rhoda Grant.
Thank you very much. Can the Cabinet Secretary explain how the Welsh Government was able to set its budget in December, facing exactly the same circumstances, while he is claiming that he is unable to set the Scottish budget?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I can explain that, and it's rather revealing that Dean Lockhart doesn't know the difference between the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly, in that our powers are quite different to the Welsh administration. They have less reliance on things such as the block grant adjustment and the tax powers and forecasts. So the massive difference between the financial systems of both countries is the explanation as to why they have gone earlier. And I think Dean Lockhart should maybe do his questions for future finance, more homework for future finance questions.
Rhoda Grant.
To ask the Cabinet Secretary if he's now been able to make a decision to publish a draft budget ahead of the UK budget to allow local authorities to plan their budgets this year, or if not, what steps he will take to assist them to put their budgets in place.
Cabinet Secretary.
It's a fair question. I think it's important that Parliament considers this. In terms of the Chief Secretary's letter to me, of course, responding to me now the day after that they set out publicly when their budget was going to be, when I had written in November, written in December. It's clear getting a letter after the decision. Scotland is not even an afterthought for the UK Government. So the day after the UK Government's announcement, I don't think is the right day for me to set out a Scottish budget date when I've pledged to engage with the convener of the Finance Committee, the Fiscal Commission and opposition parties to determine a way forward, rather than just me announce it as a fait accompli. I want to engage a bit further, but absolutely give the confidence and process that allows this Parliament to scrutinise a proposed Scottish budget, but one that commands confidence and responsibility in the face of UK Government irresponsibility.
Question 3, Maureen Watt.
To ask the Scottish Government what analysis it has carried out of the UK Government's spending pledges and the Barnett consequentials that might arise from these.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, of course, what this UK government says and what they actually do are two completely different things. So until the UK budget is published, we cannot fully know with certainty what funding will be available for our public services in Scotland arising from the UK government's spending pledges. But we have examined the pledges of the Conservative Party during the election campaign, and I've written to the Chancellor to point out that it's essential that he delivers the promised additional Barnett consequentials for Scotland.
Maureen Watt.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Yesterday, we witnessed all parties, bar one, unite in this chamber against the utter lack of respect shown by the UK Tory government to the people of Scotland and the contempt they are held in by the Scottish Tories here as they sat sniggering at their puppet master's actions. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that this is no laughing matter, and can he outline what the real consequences may be to the people of Scotland's livelihood and the services they rely upon as a result of Boris' botched budget action?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think I've made it clear that local government has acted and expressed their alarm at the UK proposed budget date and delay, but actually there's reasons to be concerned for all of Scotland's public services because they are all in a precarious position if we don't have the necessary budget approval in time for the start of the financial year. And that's all the more reason. And I say, you know, whatever politics was played out by the UK government yesterday, for devolution to work, if we actually want this Parliament to work, I think all the parties in this chamber will need to work together like never before to ensure that in these exceptional circumstances we do cooperate to take forward a budget that delivers for our people and safeguards our public services and is responsible on tax decisions as well to give the confidence and the certainty that the country so desperately wishes to see at this time.
Question 8, Gordon MacDonald.
Government what discussions it has had with the UK Government regarding the timing of the block grant settlement.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as I say, I've just received correspondence from the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. I hope engagement is more fulfilling than anything I've had to date with this current government. But the block grant settlement for Scottish Government for 2020-21 is determined in part by the announcements of the UK spending round of the 4th of September and also by the UK tax announcements and the Office for Budget Responsibilities, Tax, Social Security and Economic Forecast produced for that UK budget. So without these, we do not have an absolute clarity on future funding available for public services in Scotland, but I'll continue to engage.
Gordon MacDonald.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The UK Government's decision not to deliver their budget until 11th of March leaves an incredibly short time for the Scottish budget process and could put our local services at risk. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with the Conservative councillor and COSLA's resource spokesman, Gail McGregor, that the March UK budget runs the risk of delaying the Scottish Government's budget and significantly impedes the ability for local authorities to formulate their own budgets, meaning Scotland's communities are disadvantaged?
Cabinet Secretary, briefly, please.
I actually do agree with Councillor Gail McGregor in that regard. As COSLA's spokesperson for resource, I'll be Murdo Fraser saying, not for the first time, this is very true. This shows the strength of positive relationship between the Scottish Government and COSLA, of course. But I'll be, as I say, I'll be meeting with COSLA to discuss these matters, to try and give local government the support that it will need to get through this process. But as I say, it isn't just local government, it's all of Scotland's public services, and therefore I will return to Parliament at the earliest possible opportunity to set out the way forward.
Murdo Fraser, briefly, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Finance Secretary commit to spending all Barnett consequentials arising from health spending in England to the NHS in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, first of all, of course, it has been a manifesto pledge of the Scottish Government to allocate the resource Barnett consequentials on health to health in Scotland. That pledge continues, that practice has continued. That's exactly what I've done in my budgets. That's what I propose to continue to do.
Question 4, Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how transitional rates relief would be affected if business rate powers were devolved to local government.
Cabinet Secretary.
And now for something completely different. The Scottish Government introduced transitional relief to cap the annual increases in rates bills at 12.5% real terms until 2022, for those that were eligible, of course. That was for all but the largest hospitality across Scotland and offices in Aberdeen City and Shire. Now, Amendment 9 to the Non-Domestic Rates Scotland Bill repeals Section 153 of the Local Government Scotland Act 1994 and effectively abolishes transitional relief and removes the government's power to set further reliefs by subordinate legislation.
Gillian Martin.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Presiding Officer, during the oil and gas downturn, together with the co-leader of Aberdeenshire Council, and now MP for Gordon, and my North East SNP MSP colleagues, we negotiated with the Cabinet Secretary to put in place the very welcome transitional reliefs that he has just mentioned. I would like to ask the Cabinet Secretary that if he didn't have power to put transitional reliefs like this or national schemes like the small business bonus, what would the impact have been on businesses in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire? Cabinet Secretary.
Well, specifically in relation to Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, in 2017-18 and 2018-19, ratepayers in Aberdeenshire and Aberdeen received total relief of over £12.5 million and £14.5 million respectively, due to the relief set by the Scottish Government in subordinate legislation, including small business bonus, transitional relief, renewable energy relief. So the concern is that Section 8C of the Non-Domestic Rates Scotland Bill, inserted by the Greens at stage 2 as an amendment to the bill, would lead to the termination of these reliefs and repeal the power to set new reliefs in subordinate legislation. Let me be clear, that's not just for that part of the country, but for the whole country. The inability of the Scottish Government, through that subordinate legislation, to deliver reliefs such as around energy, such as around small business bonus scheme and renewables. And I think removing that ability from the Scottish Government would be a retrograde step, considering the usual calls upon the Scottish Government to intervene to support sectors and businesses when it's the right thing to do.
Briefly, Andy Whiteman, please.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Transitional rate relief schemes lower bills, and as we've heard, they've done so in Aberdeen City and Shire. Does the Minister not accept the principle that local economic conditions require the variation of local rates? And just as the Scottish Ministers and the Scottish Parliament can vary Scottish taxes, local authorities are actually best placed to assess when and where such variations need to be applied in their own area.
Cabinet Secretary. Well, I actually agree with localism, and that's why when I was the responsible minister, I helped take forward the provisions within the Community Empowerment Bill. So actually further reliefs can be provided by local government if they want. But I and the Scottish Government happens to believe in a national universal poundage. So that's a national rate for business. So did the Barclay Review. So did business organisations. So do some trade unions, incidentally, because it's right for business to have a national rate, a national poundage for non-domestic rates. I'm just surprised that even the Conservatives now support 32 potentially different non-domestic rates across the country, contrary to what business actually wants, but removing the ability from the government through subordinate legislation to deliver relief at the stroke of a pen abolishes small business bonus and other reliefs. And I think members should think very carefully about that when we come to the final stages of this bill, because it's anti-business and I think it's a reckless move and it's a move in error.
Question 6, Pauline McNeill.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to calls for it to no longer offer contracts to private firms that employ people on 0 hours contracts.
Minister Jamie Hepburn.
Our response is to continue taking action to tackle insecure work as part of our Fair Work agenda. Through Fair Work First, we are extending Fair Work criteria to as many funding streams, including public contracts, as we can by the end of this Parliament. These criteria include non-appropriate use of 0 hours contracts and payment of the real living wage. Legislation related to 0 hours contracts is reserved, and we repeatedly make very clear our opposition to the inappropriate use of these and other types of employment that offer workers no job security.
Pauline McNeill, briefly, please.
Does the Minister agree that for most people on 0 hours contracts it means poor terms and conditions, so sometimes no sick pay and invariably no pension, and that poor management practices make shifts working at short notice hard for many workers? Notwithstanding that I agree that employment law should be devolved to this Parliament, can the Minister assure me today that they will use their existing powers to legally outlaw the making of any contract between the Scottish Government and companies using 0 hours contracts?
Minister, briefly too, please.
Well, we won't be able to legally outlaw anything because Paul McNeill's made the very point that employment law remains reserved. I accept the Labour Party now seems to have changed its position and supports its devolution. Of course, the opposed devolution through the Smith Commission, which means we can't take that action. But yes, I agree with the fundamental premise, and we will continue to take action to do what we can to stop the inappropriate use of zero-hours contracts.
Thank you. That concludes portfolio questions. I apologise to Michelle Ballantyne, didn't manage to squeeze you in. There's no spare time this afternoon, so I'm moving straight on.